At -71 degrees Celsius, the air itself becomes a weapon. Breath freezes in your throat. Exposed skin dies in minutes. Metal shatters like glass. And the silence, the deep, crushing silence of a Siberian winter night, becomes the only sound you know. But tonight, in the vast emptiness of the Yakutian wilderness, that silence was broken. Sardana was 72 years old. Her hands were gnarled from days of work. Her face was carved with lines that only extreme cold can create. She had lived alone in her small log cabin for 11 winters now, ever since the morning she buried her husband beneath frozen ground so hard it took 3 days to dig the grave. There was no road to her home, no power lines, no neighbors within 30 kilometers, just endless forest, endless snow and cold, so severe that even the wolves stayed away. Her cabin was simple: one room, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a narrow bed covered in furs and worn blankets, a single window small and thick, frosted over completely from November to April, shelves holding jars of preserved berries, dried fish wrapped in cloth, and a sack of oats she rationed carefully. This was all she had, all she needed. She had learned to measure time differently here, not by clocks or calendars, but by the height of snow outside her door, by the thickness of ice on the water bucket, by the number of logs left in the woodpile. Right now that number was dangerously low. It was late evening when she heard it, a sound so faint and fragile that at first she thought she had imagined it. She paused, her hand resting on the edge of the table, listening. There it was again, a cry, thin and desperate, barely audible over the wind. Sardana stood slowly, her joints stiff from the cold. She pulled her heavy fur coat from the peg by the door, wrapped her wool headscarf tightly around her face, and pushed the door open against the force of the blizzard outside. The wind hit her like a physical blow. Snow swirled in every direction, erasing the world. Visibility was almost zero. The temperature outside was -71 degrees, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in less than 5 minutes. But the sound came again, clearer now, and it was close. She moved carefully toward the woodpile, each step sinking deep into powder snow that reached past her knees. Her breath formed thick white clouds that crystallized instantly on her scarf. She could feel the cold seeping through her boots, through her coat, searching for skin. Then she saw it, curled against the base of the woodpile. Nearly invisible against the white ground was a tiny Arctic fox cub. Its fur, normally pure white and thick, was matted and soaked through. Its small body shook violently with each breath, and its eyes, pale blue, clouded with exhaustion, looked up at her without the fear that wild animals should have. It was too far gone for fear. Sardana knelt down in the snow. The cold bit through her knees immediately, sharp and unforgiving, but she didn't move. She studied the cub carefully. No visible wounds, no blood, just cold, deadly, penetrating cold. The cub made no attempt to run. It didn't even try to stand. It simply watched her, its sides heaving with the effort of breathing. She knew what bringing a wild animal inside meant. It could carry disease, it could bite, it could destroy what little she had in a panic. And more practically, she had almost no food left. Her supplies were meant to last until spring, and spring was still 2 months away. Every mouthful she gave to this creature was a mouthful she would not have for herself. But she also knew, with the absolute certainty that comes from living in a place that kills without mercy, what would happen if she left it here. In 1 hour, maybe less, the cub would stop shivering. Its breathing would slow, and then it would simply stop. The cold would take it, quietly, completely. Sardana reached down and gently lifted the small fox into her arms. It weighed almost nothing. She could feel its heartbeat against her palm. Fast, irregular, desperate. It didn't struggle. It didn't make a sound. It simply pressed itself against the warmth of her coat, instinct driving it toward any source of heat. She carried it inside and closed the door against the storm. The cabin felt warm by comparison, though the temperature inside was barely above freezing. She laid the cub carefully on a worn wool blanket near the cast-iron stove and immediately added 2 more logs to the fire. 2 logs she had been saving, 2 logs that represented warmth for tomorrow night. But tomorrow didn't matter if the cub died tonight. The fire caught and grew, casting orange light across the small room. Sardana removed her coat and knelt beside the blanket. The cub lay motionless, its eyes half closed, its breathing shallow and uneven. She prepared a small bowl of warm water and mashed fish, her own dinner, the only meal she had planned for the day. She dipped her finger into the mixture and brought it to the cub's mouth. Nothing. She tried again, gently rubbing the mixture on its lips. Still nothing. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frame. The fire crackled and popped, and Sardana waited, her weathered hand resting lightly on the cub's side, feeling each fragile breath. Then, so faint she almost missed it, the cub's tongue moved. Just slightly, it licked her finger. Sardana prepared another small portion and offered it again. This time, the cub took it. Slowly, painfully, slowly. But it swallowed, and then it took another, and another. That first night was the longest Sardana had known in years. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every hour she fed the cub tiny portions of fish and water. Every hour she added small pieces of wood to the fire, carefully rationing what remained. And every hour she watched for signs, improvement or decline, life or surrender. Outside, the blizzard raged without pause. Snow piled higher against the cabin walls. The single window became completely buried, cutting off even the faint gray light of the storm. The world shrank to just this room, this fire, this small struggling light. By dawn, though dawn was only a slight lessening of darkness, the cub's breathing had steadied. Its eyes, still tired and dull, showed a flicker of awareness. It tried to lift its head and failed, but the attempt alone felt like victory. Sardana allowed herself a small breath of relief, but only a small one. She checked the woodpile. 4 logs remained, 4 logs to keep the fire burning until the blizzard passed, and she could safely venture out to gather more. At -71 degrees, with visibility near zero, that could be 3 days, maybe 5. She looked around the cabin, her eyes settled on the old wooden chair in the corner, the one her husband had made 40 years ago, before the cold had settled into his lungs and taken him. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she quietly lifted the chair, broke off one of its legs with a sharp crack, and fed it to the stove. The fire grew, the cabin warmed, and the cub slept. The days that followed fell into a desperate rhythm. Sardana rationed everything. She ate once a day, a thin soup made from fish bones and melted snow. She gave the cub the meat, the fat, the parts with substance. She burned furniture when the wood ran out, a second chair leg, then a shelf, then the small wooden box that had held her husband's belongings. Each piece that went into the fire was a memory. Each flame that consumed it was a choice. But the cub was improving. By the 3rd day, it could hold its head up. By the 5th, it stood on shaky legs, wobbling like a newborn. By the 7th, it took its first steps across the rough wooden floor, its small paws making almost no sound. Sardana watched in silence. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She simply observed, as she had learned to do in this place, where celebration came only after survival was certain. And here survival was never certain. But something unexpected was happening. Something she hadn't anticipated. The cub wasn't just recovering, it was staying close. When Sardana sat by the stove, the cub curled at her feet. When she moved to prepare food, it followed, keeping just a step behind. When she finally allowed herself to sleep, collapsing into her narrow bed from exhaustion, the small fox climbed up beside her, pressing its warm body against her side. It wasn't gratitude. Animals don't think in those terms, but it was something, a bond, wordless and complete. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The blizzard finally broke. The wind stopped. The sky cleared to a pale, colorless gray. The temperature remained brutal, still hovering near -70, but at least visibility returned. Sardana dressed in every layer she owned and ventured outside to gather firewood. The snow had drifted higher than her waist in places. Her woodpile was nearly buried. It took her 2 hours to dig out enough logs for 3 days of burning. And by the time she finished, her fingers were numb inside her gloves and her lungs ached from breathing frozen air. The cub watched from the window. She could see its small white face pressed against the frost-covered glass, barely visible. When she returned, arms loaded with wood, the fox greeted her at the door. Its tail flicked once, twice, a gesture so small that anyone else might have missed it. But Sardana noticed. In this place, small gestures were everything. She had expected the cub to leave. She had even prepared for it emotionally, knowing that wild animals belong to the wild. One morning she left the door cracked open deliberately, giving it the choice. The cub approached, sniffed the freezing air beyond, looked back at her with those pale blue eyes, and retreated inside. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. Finally, Sardana stopped trying. She accepted what had occurred. She had saved a life, and in doing so, without planning it, without even wanting it, she had gained something she hadn't realized she'd lost. Companionship. The winter deepened further. January became February. Temperatures impossibly dropped even lower. There were nights when the stove barely kept the cabin above freezing, when Sardana woke to find frost coating the inside walls, her breath visible even beneath 3 blankets. But the fox remained. It learned her routines. When she woke, it woke. When she ate, it sat beside her, waiting patiently for its portion. When she worked, mending clothes, preparing food, maintaining the fire, it watched from its spot near the stove. And on the coldest nights, when even the flames seemed to struggle against the darkness, the two of them huddled together under every piece of fabric. Sardana owned, sharing warmth, breathing in rhythm, surviving as one. Sardana began to talk to it. Not in full sentences, just small observations. Cold tonight, she might say, her voice rough from disuse. Or snow coming. The fox would tilt its head, ears forward, as if listening, as if fitting. She named it finally. Or you. It meant mind or reason in Yakut. Because keeping the fox alive had not been reasonable. It had been the opposite of reasonable. But she had done it anyway. One morning in late February, as pale sunlight finally broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, Sardana sat at her small wooden table, with Oyu curled in her lap. She ran her hand slowly through its fur, now fully grown back, thick and pristine white, soft as down. Outside, the forest was silent, the kind of silence that meant the worst of winter had passed. Spring was still far away, but it was no longer impossible. She thought about the night she had found Oyu, the choice she had made in those few seconds in the snow, The cost, the hunger, the furniture burned for warmth, the food given away when she had almost none for herself. She didn't regret it, not for a moment, because in the hardest place on earth, at the coldest edge of survival, she had proven something she had almost forgotten after 11 years alone. That kindness doesn't require abundance. That compassion doesn't wait for convenient circumstance. And that even in a place designed to take life away, a single choice, quiet, small, witnessed by no one, can give it back. Oyu stirred, adjusting position, then settled again with a soft exhale. Sardana looked out through the frosted window at the endless white expanse beyond. Spring would come eventually, and when it did, perhaps Oyu would leave. Perhaps instinct would call it back to the wild, to its own kind, to the life it was born to live. Or perhaps it wouldn't. Either way, Sardana would be ready. She had learned long ago that in Yakutia, you don't control outcomes, you only control choices. And she had made hers. The stove crackled softly. The wind was still, and in a small cabin at the edge of the world, a woman and a fox sat together in the kind of peace that only those who have survived together can understand. No words were needed, no promises made, just presence. And here in the coldest place on earth, that was enough. That was everything.